When the day of the gathering arrived, she woke up early, her nerves buzzing. She dressed simply, nothing fancy, and tied her hair back so it wouldn't fall on her face while she played. On her way to the hall, she could feel her heart beating faster with every step. When she entered, the hall was already filled with people. Families sat in clusters, students talked nervously, and guests found seats. She felt a wave of fear, but she kept walking. She spotted the teacher, who nodded at her reassuringly. The program began with a few student performances. Some were confident, some shaky, but everyone received warm applause. She watched quietly from the side, hands clasped together, waiting for her turn. Then she heard the teacher say her name. "Please welcome our guest, whose music moved us deeply this week." People looked around, trying to see who he meant. Some whispered, some straightened in their seats. She stepped forward slowly, trying to keep her steps steady. The room grew quiet, too quiet. She approached the piano and sat down. Her palms felt sweaty, her throat dry. She rested her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. Just breathe. When she opened her eyes again, she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost fragile. But then the melody grew stronger, deeper, fuller. Her hands moved with a confidence she hadn't expected. The music filled the hall like warm sunlight spreading across a room. It wrapped around everyone, pulling them into the story she was telling. People leaned forward. Some smiled softly. Others sat completely still, letting the sound carry them. Even the children in the audience grew quiet, as if the music held them gently as she played the middle section. She felt a strange emotion rising in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't nervousness. It was something purer, something brighter. She felt free. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't holding back. She wasn't afraid of being seen. She reached the ending, playing the last note with a soft, delicate touch. The sound lingered in the air like a breath held by everyone in the room, and then silence again. Deep, full, overwhelming silence. She slowly pulled her hands away from the keys. She looked up. Everyone stared at her, not with shock this time, but with awe. They weren't confused. They weren't surprised. They were moved. Then the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder, warmer, fuller, until the whole room echoed with it. People stood up. Students clapped with bright smiles. The teacher clapped proudly. Even the boy who once tried to shame her was applauding with genuine admiration. She felt her eyes warm with emotion. She had never expected this, not in her life. After the performance, people came to greet her. Some thanked her for the music. Some told her how deeply it touched them. Some simply smiled at her, unable to express their feelings through words. The boy approached her last. He looked nervous again, like the first day he apologized. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She smiled. "Thank you." He hesitated before speaking again. "I'm glad I got to hear you play." "I'm glad everyone did." She nodded softly. "I'm glad too." He looked down at his hands. "I learned something from you." She tilted her head slightly. "What is it?" "That trying to look strong is useless," he said. "It's better to feel something real than to pretend you don't care."
Ow.
She didn't expect those words, but they touched her deeply. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Music teaches all of us different things," she said softly. "I'm happy it taught you something good." When she left the hall that evening, the sky was turning orange. The air felt gentle. Her steps felt lighter. She had never experienced a day like this before, for the first time. She felt like her music didn't just belong to her anymore. It had reached others. It had changed something. It had spoken in a way her voice never could. And as she walked home, she realized something simple but powerful. She had once been shamed for playing, but now her music had taken their breath away, and she didn't need anything more than that. Not applause, not praise, not recognition, just the quiet knowledge that she had shared her. Truth and people had listened. That was enough. That would always be enough. The day had started like any other. The community hall was busy with people setting up tables, carrying boxes, and arranging chairs for the small weekend gathering. It wasn't a big event, Just something the neighborhood did every few months so everyone could meet, talk, and relax for a while. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, with laughter echoing across the room. Children ran around with snacks in their hands, elders chatted in corners, and music played softly from a speaker near the entrance. She walked in quietly, the same way she always did. She wasn't the type who liked attention. She preferred sitting in the back and watching everything from a distance. But she enjoyed being part of the community because it made her feel less alone. As she stepped inside, someone waved at her. She waved back with a shy smile. In the center of the hall stood an old upright piano. It wasn't perfect. Some of the keys were slightly chipped, and the wood had scratches from years of use. But it had a warm sound, the kind that reminded people of earlier times. The community kept it because many had memories attached to it. A few people gathered around the piano, talking about who would play something to start the day. A man tried a few random keys, but he wasn't really serious about playing. He just wanted to entertain his friends. That was when someone from the group noticed her walking by. "Hey," the woman called out. "You know how to play? Right? Why don't you try something?" The question made her pause mid-step. She looked at the piano, then at the people now staring at her. She felt her heart beat a little faster. She didn't expect anyone to ask her to play. She rarely performed in front of others. Music was personal to her, something she kept close, something she played only when she was alone. Before she could respond, one of the young men in the group laughed loudly. He had a habit of showing off and talking louder than necessary. He looked at her with a smirk, shaking his head as if the idea itself was ridiculous. "Well, come on," he said loudly, making sure others heard him. "She probably doesn't even know how to play properly. Don't waste time." A few people chuckled, mostly because they didn't know how to react. His words hit her like a cold splash of water. She felt a strange twist in her chest. Being called out like that, especially in front of others, always made her uncomfortable. She looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even offended. She was simply embarrassed. She didn't like it when people judged her before they even heard her play. Someone nudged the young man, whispering for him to stop, but he didn't care. He simply shrugged, still amused by himself. Her friend, who had arrived with her earlier, stepped closer and gently touched her arm. "Don't listen to him," the friend whispered softly. "You don't have to play if you don't want to. It's okay." She nodded and forced a small smile, grateful for the support. But deep down, the moment had already affected her. She wished she could disappear into one of the empty rooms for a while. The small group near the piano continued talking, and she walked away toward a corner where a few chairs were set up. She sat down quietly, trying to focus on the sound of people chatting instead of the comments still echoing in her mind. She remembered how she learned to play the piano when she was much younger. Her family didn't have much, but they had found a way to get her lessons because they saw how much she loved music. She would sit at the piano for hours, practicing different melodies, losing track of time. Music felt like a language she understood better than anything else, but life changed, and she had stopped playing for a while. There were things to take care of, responsibilities she had to carry. And slowly, music became something she kept in the background. She still played sometimes, but only for herself. So being asked to play in front of people made her feel exposed, as if they were asking her to open a part of her life she wasn't ready to show. Her eyes drifted back to the piano across the hall. People were still gathered around it. The young man had taken the seat and attempted to play something simple, but he wasn't very good. He pressed the wrong keys and laughed loudly when the sound came out uneven. His friends cheered him on just because it was funny. She watched them from her chair, thinking how easy it was for some people to take attention, even without any real skill or emotion behind what they were doing. Her friend sat beside her and leaned back in the chair. "You okay?" the friend asked. She nodded again. "I just didn't expect that. Shouldn't have said it," the friend replied. "But that's how he is. Don't take it to heart." She lowered her eyes. "It's just, I don't like when people look at me like that, like I can't do something." "You can," the friend said softly. "And you're good. Better than good." She felt a warm wave of gratitude, but still didn't feel ready to play. Not after that moment. An older man who often helped organize the community events walked near their table. He had heard part of the exchange earlier. He wasn't someone who liked drama, but he cared about the people in the community. He stopped and looked at her kindly. "Don't let loud voices make you doubt yourself," he said gently. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But if you ever feel like playing, the piano is there." His voice carried a sense of warmth that made her feel a little better. She thanked him quietly, and he walked on, helping someone move a stack of chairs. Still, the moment lingered in her heart. She didn't like feeling small, and the young man's laugh had made her feel just that. She wasn't angry at him. She didn't see him as a bad person. She just knew that some people didn't understand the weight of their words. Time passed slowly as she sat there, watching people come and go. The hall began filling up even more. More families arrived, more kids ran around, and the chatter grew louder. But every time she looked at the piano, her thoughts circled back to the same place. The suggestion, the laughter, the possibility of playing, the fear of being judged. Her fingers itched slightly, as if they remembered the keys. As if they wanted to play, she rubbed her palms together lightly. She didn't want to stand out, but she didn't want to hide either. She wanted to feel like herself again. Even if just for a moment, her friend noticed the way she kept looking at the piano. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" the friend asked with a knowing smile. She didn't deny it. She simply sighed softly. "A little. You don't have to rush," the friend said. "Just do what feels right." She leaned back again, closing her eyes for a moment. She tried to remember the feeling of sitting alone at her old piano at home, letting her hands move freely without fear. She remembered the way music helped her breathe, helped her think, helped her feel strong. When she opened her eyes, the young man was still near the piano, now telling a dramatic story to make people laugh. He clearly enjoyed being the loudest person in the room. She wondered if he ever thought about how his words might affect someone else. Probably not, she thought. But something inside her remained unsettled. Not angry, not hurt. Something else, something like a quiet voice telling her that maybe, just maybe, today didn't have to end the way it began. Maybe she didn't have to stay in the corner, invisible. Maybe she could walk toward the piano for herself. Not for him, not for the crowd, not to prove anything, but simply because the music still lived inside her. She didn't know yet what she would do. She didn't know if she would gather the courage to stand up or if she would stay in her seat. For the rest of the event, but the thought stayed with her like a gentle whisper. And sometimes, a whisper is enough to start a change. The noise of the hall continued to rise as more people joined the gathering, but she still sat quietly in her corner watching everything with the same calm expression she often wore. A few children ran past her with tiny plastic cups of juice, almost spilling them as they laughed. Their joy filled the room with light energy, and for a moment, she smiled without thinking. But just as quickly, her mind drifted back to the moment earlier at the piano. She could still hear the young man's voice in her head, the way he laughed, the way people turned to look at her. She tried brushing the memory away, but it sat stubbornly in her chest like a small knot that refused to loosen. Her friend leaned forward and rested an elbow on the table. "Don't let one silly comment ruin your whole day," the friend said softly. "I know," she replied, keeping her voice low. "I'm trying." "Try less," the friend said, with a small chuckle. "Just be here. Don't overthink it." She nodded, but being present wasn't easy for her. Music always brought different feelings back. Memories she sometimes wanted to hold close, and other times wanted to keep locked away. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her. It was a piece of her past, a reminder of a time when life felt different. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her mind wander back many years. She saw herself as a child, sitting at a small wooden piano in a tiny living room. The room wasn't fancy, but it felt warm because her family filled it with laughter. She used to sit at the piano every day after school, letting her fingers dance across the keys. She remembered how her mother would sit nearby, watching her with a soft smile. "You play with so much heart," her mother once told her. "Don't ever lose that." She didn't know then what life would bring. She didn't know the responsibilities waiting for her or how suddenly everything could change. Back then, music felt simple. It felt like breathing. As the years went by, she still played, but life didn't give her the same time or space. She had to work, she had to support her family, and somewhere in the middle of everything, she stopped playing as often. It wasn't because she didn't love it. It was because she didn't have the strength to carry everything at once. Now, sitting in that busy hall with the piano across the room, she felt the weight of all those memories pressing against her chest. Part of her longed to feel the keys again, but another part of her feared that she wasn't the same person anymore. The old man who had spoken to her earlier walked by again, carrying a box of decorations. He paused when he saw her sitting quietly. "You know," he said kindly, "sometimes the things we love the most are the things we keep hidden for too long, but they never stop calling us." She looked up at him, unsure how to respond. He didn't wait for her to speak. He simply gave her a reassuring nod and continued on his way. Her friend looked at her with a gentle smile. "He's right, you know." She sighed softly. "Maybe, not maybe," her friend insisted. "You've always had music inside you. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But if you feel like playing, do it for yourself." She clasped her hands together on her lap and stared at the floor. Her thoughts spun in quiet circles. She wanted to believe her friend. She wanted to believe the old man. But she could still feel the sting of that laugh from earlier. She wished people understood how much a single comment could affect someone. The young man probably didn't even mean anything serious by it. He just wanted to appear funny in front of his friends. But his words had reached her in a way he couldn't see. Across the hall, the same young man was now playing around with a group of kids, showing them silly tricks with a balloon. He laughed loudly, unaware of the impact he had made earlier. Watching him, she felt the knot in her chest loosen just a tiny bit. She didn't think he was cruel. He was just careless with his voice. The piano sat empty for a moment. The sunlight coming through the windows fell across it gently, making the old wood glimmer in a soft, warm tone. The sight tugged something inside her. She remembered practicing a soft melody as a child. She remembered the joy in her mother's eyes. She remembered sitting beside her teacher, receiving guidance with patience and kindness. She remembered playing at small school events where everyone clapped without judgment. Those memories felt warm like sunlight. They reminded her that music wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about impressing people. It was about expressing what was inside her. Her friend watched her quietly. "You're thinking again?" the friend said with a playful smile. She nodded. "I guess I am. What are you thinking about?" "Just old memories," she replied. "How different things used to be." Her friend leaned closer. "Do you miss it?" She took a slow breath. "Yes, I do." The friend placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let yourself miss it. Let yourself remember. And if you feel like playing, I'll be right here." She turned her eyes back to the piano. The room was noisy, but the piano seemed to exist in its own quiet space. No one was paying attention to it at that moment. No one stood near it. It looked almost lonely. She wondered if the piano remembered being played by many hands over the years. She wondered if it remembered the people who sat at it with shaking fingers, hoping their notes would come out right. She wondered if it remembered the laughter, the tears, the nervous smiles, all the emotions woven into its chords. She shifted in her chair, feeling a gentle wave of courage rise inside her, not strong enough to make her stand up, but enough to make her heart feel a little lighter as she sat there. An older woman approached the piano and pressed a single key, testing its sound. She smiled as the warm note filled the air. The older woman played a short tune, just a few simple notes, but it made the room feel softer. She finished and sighed, as though the music reminded her of something sweet. That piano still has a beautiful voice. The older woman said aloud. Even though no one was paying much attention, those words reached her ear like a small spark, a beautiful voice. She wondered what it would feel like to let her fingers touch the keys again. She wondered if she still had that same gentle connection with music. She wondered if people would listen in silence instead of judging her. More time passed, and the hall became even busier. People began setting out food on long tables. Children pulled their parents toward different corners asking for snacks. The young man from earlier walked by the piano again, tapping a few keys just to be playful. But this time, he didn't make any comments. Maybe he had already forgotten about the earlier moment, She looked at her friend. If I played, do you think people would even want to listen? Her friend didn't hesitate. They would. Because when you play, it doesn't sound like someone hitting keys. It sounds like a story. She blinked, touched by the words. A story? Yes, the friend said. A story you don't speak out loud, but one people can feel. She let the words settle inside her. Music as a story from her heart. Maybe that was true. She lifted her chin and looked again at the piano. She still didn't know if she could walk across the room. She still didn't know if people would judge her, but something inside her felt different now. The memory of her mother's voice, the kindness of the older man, the gentle encouragement from her friend, they all formed a small flame inside her. Warm but uncertain. She wasn't ready yet, but she was closer than before. The hall lights flickered slightly as someone adjusted the switches near the wall. The sun from outside mixed with the indoor lights, giving the room a soft golden glow. It made the piano look even more inviting. Her heart fluttered as she imagined herself sitting at it again. She could almost feel the smoothness of the keys under her fingertips. She could almost hear the first note in her mind. She could almost feel the silence of the room waiting for the music to begin. She swallowed gently, afraid of the moment but also drawn to it. Her friend placed a cup of warm tea in front of her. Here, the friend said, drink this. It'll help you relax. She smiled gratefully and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her like comfort as she drank. Her thoughts drifted to the years she spent without playing, the quiet evenings where she would stare at her old piano at home, but not sit down at it. She had always found excuses. She was too tired, too busy, too distracted. But the truth was simpler. She feared she wouldn't be the same player she once was. She feared she would disappoint herself. Now, watching the piano from a distance, she understood something. Maybe it wasn't about being as good as she once was. Maybe it was simply about reconnecting with a part of herself she had pushed away. Her friend watched her expression soften. You look like someone who's about to make a decision, the friend said teasingly. She laughed faintly. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. That's okay, the friend replied. You don't need to rush. Another small group gathered briefly around the piano, but they didn't stay long. They talked, joked, and moved away. The piano remained untouched afterward. She took another sip of tea and set the cup down slowly. Her heartbeat felt steady now, not heavy like before. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. The young man who mocked her earlier walked past her table, carrying plates to the food area. He didn't even look her way. She watched him and realized she didn't feel the sting of his words anymore. She felt distant from that moment, like it belonged to an earlier version of her. She looked again at the piano. For the first time that day, she didn't feel fear when she pictured herself sitting at it. She felt something entirely different, something like hope. The old man walked by once more and said gently, "When you're ready, the music will find you." She nodded softly. She didn't know if he understood how deeply those words touched her. As the hall grew louder, as people continued talking and laughing, she felt a small shift in her heart. She was no longer simply remembering who she used to be. She was beginning to feel like the person who could find her way back to the music. And even though she didn't yet stand, even though her hands stayed folded in her lap, she knew the noise in the hall grew warmer and busier as the afternoon settled in. People continued moving around the room, setting plates on the tables, carrying drinks, and chatting about everyday things. The energy felt comfortable, almost like soft background music that flowed with the rhythm of the gathering. But inside her chest, another rhythm beat quietly, steady but nervous. Her eyes kept drifting back to the piano. It remained untouched for a while, sitting there like a quiet guest, waiting for someone to come close. A few children had gone near it earlier, giggling as they pressed a few keys and ran away. But no adult had sat down to play, since the older woman had touched it briefly. She didn't know if she was ready to walk over. She didn't know if her legs would even move if she tried. But the feeling in her heart, the subtle pull toward the piano kept. Growing stronger, her friend noticed her staring again. "You want to go?" the friend said softly. Not asking, but stating it like a fact. She didn't answer right away. She simply breathed in, breathed out, and let her fingers tap lightly on the arm of the chair. "I'm thinking about it," she finally murmured. Her friend gave a warm smile. Thinking is the first step. The next one is standing up. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "That part is harder," the friend nodded. "I know, but you're not alone." She looked around the hall again. Nobody was paying attention to her. No one seemed to be waiting for her to do anything. The young man who mocked her earlier was busy talking with a group near the snack table. He laughed loudly at something someone said. She caught herself flinching just a little, but not the way she had before. The sound didn't hit her as sharply now. She straightened her back. Maybe that meant she was healing from the moment. An announcement came through a small microphone near the front. It was calling people to gather for a short welcome message. Chairs shuffled as people moved to sit down. Her friend nudged her gently. "We don't have to go to the front," the friend said. "We can stay here if you want." She appreciated that. Large crowds made her nervous. And her friend always knew when to give her the space she needed, as the organizer spoke about the event. The people, the food, and the simple purpose of bringing everyone together. She listened quietly. But her thoughts drifted again, not back to the young man and his rude comment, but back to the memories of herself at the piano as a child. She remembered the confidence she once had. She remembered how sitting at the piano had made her feel safe, even when life outside the music felt uncertain. She remembered how her hands had always seemed to know what to do, even when her mind didn't. The speech ended with applause, and people scattered again. Some moved toward the food, others toward the tables, others toward friends they hadn't spoken to in a while. The flow of the event resumed naturally. Her friend leaned toward her. "You know, you don't have to wait for the perfect moment. You can create one." She looked at the piano again. The perfect moment didn't exist, not for her, not here. But maybe she didn't need perfection. Maybe she just needed bravery. She took a deep breath. Her friend watched her with quiet encouragement, saying nothing, giving her space to choose. Then, almost without thinking, she placed her hands on the armrests of the chair and lifted herself to her feet. Her friend's eyes softened. "There you go." She felt her heartbeat rise. Her legs felt light, nervous, unsure, but they held her. She stood still for a moment, grounding herself. Her friend didn't touch her, didn't guide her, just stood beside her. In silent support, she took one small step, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because she doubted herself, but because she knew this moment meant something. It wasn't just about playing music. It was about facing her fear, facing a piece of herself she had left behind for years. She walked slowly across the hall. No one paid attention. People were too busy talking, eating, laughing, but somehow that made it easier. Halfway there, she stopped and closed her eyes for a moment. She took another deep breath. Her friend stood a few steps behind her, not rushing. Just letting her take her time, she opened her eyes again. The piano was close now, and suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. The young man, the same one who had mocked her earlier, walked past her without noticing her at first. But when he saw her standing near the piano, he paused. "Are you actually going to play?" he asked, sounding surprised. She froze. His tone wasn't cruel this time, just uncertain, almost confused. But hearing his voice now at this moment made her heart pound in her ears. She didn't answer. She didn't know if she even could. Her friend stepped forward before she had to. "She doesn't need your permission," the friend said calmly. The young man blinked, taken aback. "Hey, I wasn't saying anything bad. Just asking." He lifted his hands slightly as if to show he meant no harm. Then he stepped aside. Giving her space, she stared at the piano bench. It looked simple, old, and slightly worn. She could tell hundreds of people had sat on it through the years. She wondered if she belonged there too. Her friend's voice came softly from behind her. "Whenever you're ready." She swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, but not in a painful way, more like emotions struggling to rise. She stepped forward. She touched the back of the piano, lightly with her fingertips, feeling the smooth wood under her hand. She pulled the bench out gently and sat down. The room didn't fall quiet. People kept talking and moving. The event continued as normal. But to her, everything felt still, like a bubble had formed around her. She placed her hands on her knees for a moment, gathering strength. She looked down at the keys. They were white, with slight yellowing from age. The black ones shiny from decades of fingers pressing them. She lifted her right hand slowly and rested her fingertips on the keys, her breath caught. It had been so long. The young man stood not far away, watching, without speaking. Her friend watched too, but with a calm, gentle expression. She pressed one key. A soft note floated out. Pure, warm, familiar. Her eyes stung a little. She closed them for a moment as the sound echoed lightly in her ears. She pressed another key, then another. The notes formed a simple pattern, nothing complicated, just enough to center her thoughts. Her shoulders relaxed. She placed both hands gently on the keys. For a moment, she hesitated. Her fingers trembled slightly. She felt both exposed and protected all at once. Her friend whispered softly, "Just breathe." She took a breath, and then she began to play. The melody started quietly. A soft, gentle tune she remembered from years ago, piece she had learned when she was young. Her fingers felt slow at first, uncertain, like someone taking steps on unfamiliar ground. But the sound felt right. Each note flowed into the next, carrying warmth with it. The melody wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to impress. It was simply honest and expression of years of emotion she had kept inside. People began noticing the sound. Conversations softened. Heads turned. A few people stopped walking. She didn't notice them yet. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting the music guide her. The young man's smile faded, replaced by a look of shock. He had expected something simple, maybe even clumsy. But this wasn't the playing of someone unsure. This was the playing of someone who had lived with music for years. Her hands grew steadier as she played. The melody deepened, grew richer. Her fingers remembered shapes, patterns, emotions. Every key she touched felt like a memory returning slowly, beautifully. Her friend had tears in their eyes but didn't wipe them away. They just watched, amazed. More people stopped what they were doing. The room grew quieter, not silent yet, but quieter. Like everyone felt the music settle gently over them. She kept playing, letting her heart speak through the keys. When she finally reached the end of the piece, she held the last note softly. Letting it fade naturally into the air, she lifted her hands off the keys. Silence filled the room. A different silence. A full one. People stared, breathless. She blinked and looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on her. Her heart raced again. Her hands trembled. Her friend whispered, "It's okay." Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire hall filled with applause. She sat frozen, overwhelmed, unsure how to react. Her friend stepped closer and whispered, "See? You didn't lose your music." The young man who had mocked her earlier looked stunned. He slowly approached, stopping a few steps away. "Didn't know you could play like that," he said quietly. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply lowered her eyes. "But that was beautiful," he added, more softly, almost with respect. She nodded slightly, accepting the words without bitterness. Her friend placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did it," the friend whispered. "You really did it." And as the applause slowly faded, she felt something shift inside her, for the first time in years. She felt whole again. She wasn't just the quiet woman who hid her talent. She wasn't the person defined by fear or self-doubt. She was someone who had found her way back to her music, and this was only the beginning. The hall felt different. The next morning, almost quieter, almost as if it was waiting for something to happen. She arrived early again, the same notebook in her hand, the same soft steps that carried her across the empty space. But her mind was heavier than the day before. She kept replaying the moment when the teacher and the students had watched her play. She could still hear the whisper that had tried to mock her, the one that was meant to shame her. But she also remembered the silence after her playing, the way the room froze, and how even the boy who had tried to embarrass her had no words left. Still, she didn't let herself get carried away. She sat down on a bench near the window and took a long breath. The sunlight touched her face, and she let the warmth settle on her skin. It was calming, but it didn't erase the mix of fear and excitement that lived inside her. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to eyes following her. She wasn't used to people whispering about her. She had spent most of her life trying to stay unnoticed, trying not to disturb anyone, trying to avoid conflict. And now, a room full of students had seen a part of her she didn't often share. She closed her notebook and stood up. She walked toward the piano, touching its side gently, like greeting an old friend. She lifted the cover and pressed a single key. The sound filled the empty hall, soft but clear, while she played a few notes to warm her hands. She thought about the boy who had tried to shame her. She wondered why he reacted that way. She had seen students like him before, young, proud, either fighting for attention or hiding insecurities behind sarcasm. She knew there was more to him than the comment he had made. Soon the hall doors opened and students began entering. Some greeted her with small smiles, the kind that came from curiosity. Some nodded politely, but others looked away, pretending she wasn't there. She didn't blame them. They didn't owe her anything, but she did notice the teacher approaching her with a kind smile. He stood beside her quietly for a moment. "You made quite an impression yesterday," he said. She looked down shyly. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything." "You didn't disrupt," he replied softly. "You reminded them what real passion looks like." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made her nervous. But she appreciated the sincerity in his voice. The boy from yesterday walked in, trying to act casual. His shoulders tensed the moment he saw her. He looked around, hoping no one noticed. When his eyes met hers, he froze for a second, not with anger, but with something closer to confusion, maybe even regret. She offered him a small, polite nod. She didn't want to embarrass him. He hesitated, then nodded back quickly and rushed to his seat. The teacher began the class, explaining a new exercise. But midway through the lesson, he surprised everyone. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to ask our guest if she would be willing to help with a demonstration." A wave of nervous warmth washed over her. She didn't expect this. She hadn't planned on being the center of attention again. "Only if you're comfortable," the teacher added. She took a breath and nodded slowly. She stood up and walked to the piano while the students watched carefully. Some curious, some unsure of what to expect, the teacher placed a sheet of music in front of her. It was something she recognized, a piece known for its delicate pacing and emotional depth. She had played it before, but never in a place like this. "Play it as you feel it," the teacher said. She nodded again and rested her fingers on the keys. For a moment, the room felt too quiet. She could hear her heartbeat. She could feel every pair of eyes focused on her. Then she began. Her hands moved slowly at first, finding their place, feeling the music rather than reading it. The hall filled with a warm, gentle sound, soft at the beginning, smooth and steady. The notes blended together like a story being told without words. As she played, her nerves faded. She forgot about the people watching. She forgot about yesterday. She forgot about everything except the music. Every key felt familiar, every movement natural. When she reached the middle section, the piece grew more emotional. She played it the way she always did, honestly, without trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing. She was simply sharing something from within her. The teacher watched her with a calm smile. The students leaned forward slightly. Even the boy who had tried to shame her looked stunned. He wasn't whispering this time. He wasn't smirking. He was listening. The final notes came almost like a whisper. She pressed the last key and held it for a moment, letting the sound fade slowly. Then the room stayed silent again. Just like the day before, she lifted her hands from the piano gently, almost unsure of what to do next. She kept her eyes down for a second before looking up. The students didn't speak. They didn't move. Some took a small breath as if waking from a dream. One of the girls whispered, "Wow." Under her breath, the teacher finally broke the silence. "That," he said softly, "is how music speaks when words are not enough." She felt her face warm again, but this time from gratitude, not fear. When she stepped away from the piano, she saw the boy stand up. He hesitated, then walked toward her slowly. He stopped a few steps away, unsure of his words. He started. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have said what I said yesterday. I didn't know you could play like that." She gave him a gentle look, not angry, not disappointed. "It's all right," she said quietly. "We all say things without thinking sometimes." The boy nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thanks. I'm really sorry." "Thank you for saying that." He returned to his seat, and class continued. But the mood in the room had changed. Something unspoken passed between them all. The students seemed more attentive, more connected to the music, more willing to listen. After class ended, many students approached her. They asked questions, shared curious comments, and some even requested advice. She answered each person patiently, though she still felt shy. It was a new experience for her, being seen, being valued. On her way out, the boy caught up with her again. His steps were hesitant. "Can I ask something?" he said. She nodded. "How did you learn to play like that?" he asked genuinely. She paused, thinking about the best way to answer. "Life taught me," she finally said. "Every feeling I couldn't say, I played instead." He looked down, absorbing her words. "I want to learn too," he said quietly. "Not to be the best, but to really feel it the way you do." She smiled softly. "You can. Anyone can, if they respect the music." He nodded again, this time with determination instead of fear. She walked home with a calm heart. She still had worries, still felt unsure about the attention she was getting. But there was also something new inside her, something warm, something hopeful. That evening she sat by her window again, listening to the quiet outside. She didn't touch the piano at home. She just sat quietly, thinking about the day. She realized something important. The boy's apology had mattered, but more than that. The class seeing her play had opened something inside her she didn't know she needed. A sense of belonging. A sense of being understood. A sense that maybe, after all this time, her love for music wasn't something she had to hide. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she looked forward to it, and somewhere deep inside her, she could feel the next part of her story beginning to take shape. The next few days moved quietly, but something inside her felt different. She noticed it every morning when she walked toward the hall. Every time she touched the piano keys, every time she heard footsteps behind her. The fear that once lived in her chest had softened, replaced by something calmer, something steadier. It wasn't confidence exactly, but it was close. It felt like the beginning of it. The students treated her differently now. Not with surprise anymore, but with a warm familiarity. They spoke to her with more ease, asked questions without hesitation, even joked around her. She had never been a part of a group like this. She had always moved quietly in her own world, but now it felt as if that world had opened up just a little. The boy who had tried to shame her seemed to change the most. He no longer hid behind loud remarks or careless comments. Instead, he stayed after class sometimes, sitting near the piano, struggling with new pieces. She noticed the effort he put in, the way he frowned while practicing, the way he kept adjusting his hands in hopes of finding the right sound. One afternoon, he approached her again when the hall was almost empty. "Can you listen to something?" he asked quietly. She nodded and stood beside the piano while he played a short melody. It wasn't perfect, and his hands trembled in a few places, but she could hear the effort, the sincerity, the willingness to learn. When he finished, he looked up, waiting for her reaction. "You're improving," she said softly. His shoulders relaxed. "Because you helped me understand it." She smiled a little. She wasn't used to being someone's guide. She wasn't used to being seen as someone worth learning from. But she appreciated the honesty in his voice as the days passed. More students began asking if she could help them understand their pieces better. She didn't give formal lessons, but she shared small advice, simple tips, the little things she had learned over the years. She never spoke like a master or someone superior. She only shared what she felt. Then one day the teacher approached her with a thoughtful look. "There's going to be a small gathering here this weekend," he said. "Parents, students, and a few guests will be attending. It's nothing official, just a small program. I was wondering if you would consider playing a piece for them." She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "Me?" She asked. "Only if you want to," he said gently. "No pressure at all. But I think they would appreciate hearing you again." She looked down at the floor. A crowd, a performance. People watching her intentionally this time. Not by accident, not by surprise, but expecting something from her. The thought made her heart tremble. "You don't have to decide right now," the teacher added. "Just think about it." She nodded slowly. That night, she sat in her room for a long time without touching her piano at home. She just stared at her hands, wondering if she was prepared for something like this. She knew she loved playing, but performing in front of people was different. Playing alone was easy. Playing while being watched was frightening. But when she closed her eyes, she remembered the silence in the hall the first day they heard her play. She remembered the softness in the students' eyes afterward. The boy's apology, the teacher's encouragement, and the unexpected warmth she'd felt when people listened. She realized something. She had spent her whole life hiding the one thing that made her feel alive. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The next day she approached the teacher quietly. "Play," she said. He smiled. "I'm glad." She'd practiced more than usual that week. Not in a pressured way, but in a peaceful one. She played at the end of classes when the hall was quiet. Sometimes the students stayed to listen, sitting in small groups, whispering softly among themselves. The boy stayed the most, always sitting in the same spot, always watching carefully.